Today, we're digging into something that, let's be honest, a lot of us have probably felt. That little nagging sense that our empathy, our ability to really connect with what other people are feeling, is kind of fading. We're going to look at why that might be happening, right? Does it ever feel like your internal server for processing other people's feelings has just completely crashed? One minute you're connected, you get it, and the next it's just 404, empathy not found. Well, you are definitely not alone in feeling this way, and the reasons why, they might not be what you think. Now, our first guesses are usually pretty logical, right? We figure, of course, our empathy is taking a hit. It takes a ton of mental energy. Or we're just completely numb from the constant fire hose of bad news. Or maybe we just feel like suffering is so everywhere that our little bit of empathy won't even make a dent. And you know what? Those are all really valid points, and we are going to circle back to them. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Science actually points to 6 other surprisingly odd reasons for this empathy crash. And these are things that have almost nothing to do with our daily doom scrolling or the state of the world. Nope, these are a little more personal. So let's start by looking inward at what we'll call the internal saboteurs. These are the hidden, kind of sneaky biological and psychological things that can quietly turn down our empathy dial without us even noticing. First up is a hormone you've probably heard of, oxytocin. Yeah, it's often called the bonding hormone, sometimes even the cuddle chemical. It is absolutely central to those feelings of safety, of social connection, of intimacy. You can think of it as the chemical bedrock for all those warm, empathetic feelings. And here's the thing, when our oxytocin levels are low, which can sometimes be influenced by simple things like our diet, our capacity for empathy can seriously drop. The research shows a direct link here. Less oxytocin can actually mean less empathy. Simple as that. Okay, so we've got a hormone, but the next internal saboteur is something a lot more common. It's something many of us reach for without a second thought. And yeah, there's a good chance it's in your medicine cabinet right now. Check this out, because this is a wild connection. On one side, you have common painkillers. They work by dulling your brain's perception of your own physical pain. But it turns out the wiring in our brain for physical pain and emotional pain overlaps. So when you take something to numb yourself to a headache, you might also be accidentally numbing your ability to feel for someone else's heartache. Now, this third internal saboteur, it's a habit, and it's one that many of us think is actually a good thing. It's what happens when we start listening to our own memories instead of the story that someone is trying to tell us. It goes like this, right? Someone is sharing a problem with you, and your brain immediately starts scanning its files for a similar experience to show them you understand. And that comes from a good place, but it can totally backfire because you start activating your own memories, and suddenly the focus shifts from their experience to yours. And just like that, without even meaning to, you've made it about you. Okay, so we've looked at the saboteurs working from the inside. Now, let's zoom out and look at some external factors, the social and psychological divides all around us that can totally change how we see and how we feel for other people. So our brains are basically hardwired to categorize people into an in-group and an out-group. And as you can see here, our behavior changes dramatically based on which box we put someone in. We tend to be cooperative and helpful with our in-group, but we can become competitive or just plain indifferent toward an out-group. And here's the crazy part. These groups can be based on literally anything. Sure, big things like race or culture, but also things as seemingly small as the city you live in or even the sports team you root for. Our brains just love drawing these lines in the sand, and very often, our empathy stops right at that border. This next one can be boiled down to a really simple but powerful equation that your brain is using all the time. And it's this: physical distance equals psychological distance. See, our minds often use concrete ideas, like how far away something is, to understand abstract ones, like emotional connection. So what does this mean in the real world? Well, it means a problem happening to someone far away just feels less urgent, and we naturally feel less empathy. And this works for both physical distance, like someone on the other side of the world, and emotional distance, like a total stranger versus your best friend. The farther away they feel, the quieter our empathy gets. All right, and for our final odd reason, let's talk about power. Because it turns out that social power dynamics can create some really strange, counterintuitive behaviors that, well, they look a lot like a lack of empathy. So, a fascinating study uncovered something really weird about power and giving. Just look at this chart. When people who were put in a position of power were asked to give to others, they gave the least to the people who were only moderately poor. But look at that last bar. They gave the absolute most to those who were described as completely powerless. Researchers think it's because seeing total powerlessness triggers some kind of deep-seated sense of social responsibility. So here's the really surprising paradox of power, isn't it? It's often the person who's stuck in the middle, not the poorest of the poor, who gets overlooked and ends up receiving the least help. Okay, so after going through all those surprising kind of hidden reasons, let's bring this whole thing full circle. Because remember those common sense hunches we all had at the very beginning? Well, it turns out science says you were absolutely right about those two. The two big ones are, first, empathy fatigue. And that is a very real feeling of burnout from the constant emotional drain of just caring. And second, desensitization. This happens when we're exposed to suffering again and again and again, especially through the news or social media, until our emotional response just gets worn down. This means people whose jobs demand constant emotional output, counselors, doctors, first responders, and frankly, even those of us who just can't stop doom scrolling, can literally run out of our empathy quota for the day. It just becomes an unsustainable emotional expense. So, we've seen how hormones, painkillers, mental habits, social divides, and just sheer exhaustion can all work together to make our empathy server crash. Which brings us to one last but really crucial thought. Look, just understanding the system, knowing all these hidden little switches that can turn our empathy off, that's a huge first step. The next step, though, that's a personal one. It's about finding the switches that help you turn it back on. So I'll just leave you with this question. Knowing what you know now, what helps you reboot your system?